So there I was, perusing Reddit, and I saw a post at the top of Reddit. They said Shadowmeld in Season 2, and they were asking about some of the most popular Shadowmelds in Season 2, so I took it upon myself to take some time and talk about one of the most broken abilities in the game, Shadowmeld, how it works in Mythic Plus, and things that you can actually use it on that you probably didn't recognize to begin with. There's something that's also equally as broken as Shadowmeld, and it's Twitch priming to my Twitch page. As I've been streaming 6 to 7 days a week, I've been ramping up the content lately. Hope you guys have been enjoying it. And it would mean so much to me if you came over to my Twitch page and you sent me a prime. Thank you guys so much and enjoy the video. All right, let's start by talking about one of the most popular uses of Shadowmeld this season, and it's skipping Truesight mobs with Meld. So if you've watched any of my series where I'm breaking down world first runs, you've kind of seen this in the past. If you've done even like 12s or something like that, you'll probably see tanks try this in keys, particularly at the end of like Motherlode, I think is one of the most popular ones, where you're able to skip mobs that have Truesight with Meld. And the way that you actually do this is fairly simple. You just have to be able to get distance away from the mobs. That's why Vengeance Demon Hunter is quite good for this. But even other specializations, like let's say Prot Warrior with Heroic Leap can be able to skip Truesight mobs with Meld. Typically how this is done is the mobs are pulled off to the side. And these are going to be Lieutenant mobs more often than not. And that's why they're a little bit tricky to be able to skip with Meld. Otherwise, you could, drop a Sigil of Misery or polymorph them, walk by, and then meld them off. But since more often than not these mobs have are lieutenant mobs and can't be CC'd, you'll pull them off to the side. Then you will make sure that you get distance away from those mobs, and you have to be like very far out of combat of them. Let's say 20 to 30 yards, and then once you leap. And you can see it on screen right here. Once you leap as far as possible, then you can press the Shadowmeld and you will drop combat with the mobs that are behind you. Ellesmere also has a Shadowmeld reminder Weakaura that you see on screen right here. I will leave it down in the description as well. Basically what it does is it takes your Shadowmeld, it checks if it's on cooldown or off cooldown, and it tells you things that you can or cannot Shadowmeld. It'll basically just like pop up on your screen telling you to press the meld at that point. If you want something that's really easy to use and not really having to think about it too much, especially for these specific abilities, this is a great starting point for most players. So now, with one of the most important ways that you can use Meld out of the way, let's start talking about individual mechanics that can be Shadow Melded. So of course, Shadow Meld works great for things like threat drops or just canceling casts. In some situations, whenever you're in a little bit of a tricky spot, pressing that Shadow Meld on a caster can be very valuable. Same with threat. And I think that it is completely broken with how threat works in this game. And having access to Shadow Meld is honestly an important part of rotation for a lot of melee DPS players to make sure they don't rip threat and just get meleeed by the pack and die. But with the ability to be able to cancel cast, there are some individual abilities that Shadowmeld works really well on, and we're going to kind of cover some of those. First and foremost, we have the Light Spawns and Priory. They will channel a beam onto your player, and this beam does a significant amount of damage. You are able to meld this beam off, and the mob won't recast until that beam, the cooldown of it, is back up again. And so there are a lot of situations, particularly whenever you have footmen, or particularly whenever you have just like other group-wide damage that's happening at the exact same time, where these light spawns are very dangerous. Say you have a mage or a conjurer cast going off at the exact same time. If you have this light spawn channeling on you, you're probably not going to be able to live that. So having the knowledge that you can meld it, or say we get picked with 2 light spawn casts in a row, we just slam meld on that, and that's a major defensive press, right? That's basically the best defensive that you can possibly press. It's making you immune to the light spawn damage. Other abilities in Priory, the first boss in Priory, whenever he does his Savage Maul on you, you can also meld that off. That will allow you to take less damage from the Savage Maul. However, he can start casting his Disruptive Shout, and if he is still shielded while he starts casting his Disruptive Shout, so the Savage Maul, every single time he casts it, he puts a shield on himself. Melding it doesn't remove the shield. It just stops him from doing the damage to you as the player. But if the shield persists, the ability to kick that Disruptive Shout is actually protected. It is a protected cast. So you kind of have to know that in advance. You have to be kind of looking at when his cast timer is for the Disruptive Shout. And honestly, you don't necessarily need to meld the Savage Maul. Now, there are particular instances whenever you have like Emberlens on top of the boss and the boss is doing the pulsing AoE, you don't want to be Savage Maul during that. So that's a great time to actually press the meld as an overlap. Whenever you have dual Maul, I think, on the boss as well, whenever it starts casting the Firestorm and it puts the fire circles on the ground, that's also a great point for you to be able to look to meld so you can continue to dodge those circles that are on the ground. But also, just defensively, send that meld on CD. It's actually a great use on the first boss of Priory. On the final boss of Darkflame Cleft, the Shadow Blast on the Darkness encounter can also be melded, and that's actually a huge deal. The Shadow Blast can hit you for, I think you have to defensive it. Once you get to higher keys, it's going to be about 100% of your HP. It depends. Obviously, it depends on what key level you're doing it on, but being able to meld that off, it allows you to continue to stay in the candle as a DPS or as a healer, and it allows you to continue to do just more damage to the boss. And it's a mitigation tool, right? We're not going to be having to press a defensive. We're not going to be having to go into bear form. There's no reason that we're going to be like losing a lot of damage there. And I think that that's like a huge deal for the Darkness encounter. The Stormrooks, they have an ability called Energized Barrage, and it's kind of similar to the Light Spawns in Priory of the Sacred Flame, where it's this beam that's channeled on you. There are specific instances, particularly whenever you're pulling a Stormrook with, let's say, a Void Rider. The Void Rider is doing like a pulsing AoE cast. The Stormrook is starting to cast that Energized Barrage on you. That's a great time to be looking to press a meld. Additionally, if you're pulling, let's say, the Stormrook with the first boss puts these circles onto players. And again, that's a great time for you to be looking to slam down your meld. Obviously, it can just be used as general mitigation, and using it early is more effective than not being able to use it at all, because it can pick players multiple times. So waiting for the right time to press it isn't always the most valuable thing. But those Stormrook's Energized Barrage can be very deadly, especially whenever it happens in conjunction with other damage, or you let like a Thunderer cast go off. And so those are kind of the reasons that we're looking to meld the Stormrook's Energized Barrage. Now, some mobs will just recast their abilities. And more often than not, whenever mobs just like slam recast their ability, if you meld it, it's not exactly the most useful thing. But there's a couple of instances in which this can be pretty valuable. First and foremost, the Big Mama Sonic Boom cast, the silence circle thing. There are specific instances in which melding that is actually very valuable, particularly if you're like a DPS inside of their cooldowns. You don't want to be moving. You don't even have the possibility of being silenced. Maybe pressing a meld there could actually be very valuable. On Azerok, the Earth Ragers have a fixate ability where they'll chase you around for a while. Melding those off, there can be a correct target. So say you're playing on a class like a Shadow Priest that it really can't move as much. You don't have a bunch of globals where you're able to like plant and cast, but you're playing with somebody who does, say a Fire Mage. A Fire Mage has a bunch of movement globals. It's probably more valuable for that ability to actually go on the mage as opposed to you on the Shadow Priest. And so, like, say you get targeted with the Azerok Earth Rager fixates, you see that the Earth Rager that's going to continue to be fixated onto you isn't the one that's being empowered by the boss. You just slam down meld on that, and hopefully it retargets somebody else. Now, you can't guarantee that it's going to retarget another player. It could pick you just again, which in that case, it sucks. But, those are the kind of the situations in which, pressing meld on an ability that can recast is still pretty valuable. On top of that, the Earth Rager, the cast time on that is like 4 or 5 seconds. And so even if you just need to press meld to build space and distance away from those Earth Ragers, it can be pretty valuable. Now, Motherlode has actually a lot of other melds. So Azerite Catalyst on Grixis Fluxflame is a very valuable meld. So the Azerite Catalyst, especially if you're playing it with the War Machine, the Grixis Fluxflame encounter with the War Machine, the Azerite Catalyst can actually clutter up a bunch of your room. And whenever you have the War Machine, there's like a lot of stuff going on at the same time. Your tank is worried about dying. They don't really want to worry about continuing to drag the mobs around. And so if you meld this Azerite Catalyst off, it's going to allow you to have a lot more space. You can drop 3 puddles of this Azerite Catalyst on top of one another, again, continuing to give yourself a better space and less area denial just in general, but melding it off is also pretty valuable. On top of that, Mogul Razdunk, he has a honing missile ability, and that can be melded in 2 separate ways. First and foremost, you can just meld it on the cast itself. Whenever it's trying to target you, you can just meld it, and he doesn't recast. The second way that you're able to meld it is if the honing missile comes out and say our meld was already on CD, we can make sure that nobody is inside the circle of the honing missile itself. We can press meld, the missile explodes. Now the missile can bug to re-explode, and this isn't even necessarily just a thing with Shadowmeld. This can just happen naturally. And so you really need to make sure that you're not inside the honing missile circle whenever you're pressing meld, and nobody else inside of it as well, to be able to mitigate as much damage as possible. In the Zav wing of Theater of Pain, the mini bosses, a lot of them have abilities where they'll target you with like an axe, right? It'll be like throw axe or something like that. Most of these abilities are meldable and they will not recast. This is a huge deal because all of them are also LOSable, but the fact that you can also, continue to stand in the middle of the room, you can press meld if it starts to target you with one of those throw weapon abilities, and then, making sure that you're able to continue to do damage to the mobs or continue to heal your party. That's a huge deal, and it's going to help you speed up these bosses a lot. The final meld, and probably one of the most important melds, is the Omega Buster line on the final phase of King Mechagon in Workshop. So how this works is the Omega Buster will cast the Giga Zap line onto players, and he will target 3 players. Typically, these are unique players, but these are what this actually is players that don't have the Giga Zap debuff. And so basically, he'll target players with the Giga Zap. and he only targets up to 3 times total. So what this allows you to do is if you get targeted with that Giga Zap, you're able to meld it off, and he won't actually recast a 3rd time during that phase. That counts as one of his casts, allowing you to have substantially less damage taken on your party. This is great if you are the 3rd person that's selected with that Giga Zap cast. On top of that, if you're about to go into the Magneto arm and you don't really want to be pressing your defensive on that Giga Zap dot because it is very deadly, and instead you would rather press it on that Magneto arm, that's also a great point at which you can be looking to press the Shadowmeld. Typically, I try to get 2 uses of Shadowmeld in P2. That boss phase tends to only last around 2 to 2.5 minutes, depending on key level, depending on lust. A couple factors that have to be factored in here. But in general, I try to just get 2 uses out of it if possible. Obviously, it's not always going to be the case that you're going to be able to get multiple uses out of your Shadowmeld, but I do try to get it. On top of that, you don't always get targeted, especially since it can go in the tank. So you can have multiple minutes where you're not actually selected. So I just slam it the first time I get targeted with the Omega Buster line from the Giga Zap. And those are some of the most important Shadowmelds that I understand in Mythic Plus this season. I may have missed 1 or 2, but realistically, I tried to talk about the most important ones that are the most widely used in all of Mythic Plus. I hope to see you guys in the next video. I hope you guys have been enjoying the videos I've been putting out lately, and I will see you guys later. Goodbye.